Hello and welcome to the Voices of the Learning Network, the podcast that connects and amplifies voices across the learning and development communities. I'm Bill Banham, a board member at the Learning Network, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us today. Each episode, we sit down with expert thinkers and doers in the L&D space to explore how we can create more meaningful, impactful, and future-ready learning experiences. Today's episode is a special one because our guest isn't just influencing the future of learning, he's helping to define it. Julian Stodd is a pioneering thinker, author, and the founder of Seesaw Learning. His work centres on the concept of social age, the evolving space where formal structures meet the informal social systems of our working lives. Julian's work spans leadership, career, learning design and change, and he brings a distinctive reflective style that invites us to challenge assumptions and reimagine what's possible. He's also one of our keynote speakers at this year's Connect conference coming up next month. So it's the perfect moment to dive into the ideas that are shaping his work and ours. Julian, welcome to the Voices of the Learning Network. It's wonderful to have you here with me today.
Well, hello, Bill. Thanks for having me along. It's great to be here.
So let's dive straight in. You've written extensively about the social age. For those newer to the concept, can you explain what it is and how it changes the way we think about learning?
Yes. So my work forms a 15-year longitudinal study of the social age, but in all that time, I've struggled to tell you exactly what it is because it describes a broad landscape of change. Essentially, it looks at how social collaborative technologies have changed our underlying sociology. So it looks at ideas like our radical connectivity, the diffusion and democratization of technology, a general rebalancing of power between individuals and organizations, and a fracturing social contract. And it says, together, all of these things create a new context for our organizations, a new environment that they inhabit, and we should adapt them accordingly. And when it comes to learning, one of the things we see is that there's a fundamentally new nature of knowledge. The notion of how knowledge is created and held has become more dynamic and adaptive. And of course, learning has ceased to be something defined by time and place and become much more embedded in notions of performance. Hence why my work on social learning looks at scaffolded models where we create structures or landscapes for people to learn within, and the idea of how we use learning continuously in dialogue with our practice.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So you, of course, are one of the fabulous keynotes at the November Connect conference. And at the conference, one of our big themes is the bridge between emerging technologies and human capability. What do you see as the biggest opportunities and tensions at that intersection?
Yes, well, I mean, first of all, I should say I'm very grateful for the opportunity to take part in that event because I think the network does fantastic work, and more importantly, everybody involved in it is a really wonderful practitioner. So also to see Amy Brown there is going to be a real treat. So, but that's a sort of thanks to Tom and the whole crowd involved. The tension is interesting. I could answer it in two ways. On the one hand, emergent technologies are liberating us. They are allowing us to do things that were never possible before, ever faster. We're able to experiment and explore at greater speed. There's a really dynamic and liberating aspect of technologies. On the other hand, what we are on the boundary of is a wholesale disruption of our notions of work and the value that we place in people. Our relationship with utility and with organizations is deeply under threat. And I'm afraid I take a rather pragmatic view of this, which is that in the short term, we're likely to see a widening of the gap between those who are enabled and those who are overshadowed by these technologies. So whilst I'm an optimist and believe that sort of in aggregate, they unlock a great deal of capability and potential for humans in general, I do think there's going to be significant cost imposed on individual practitioners by organizations, and it will accelerate our need to address the ethics and social context of adoption.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've just got back, as we record this, I've just got back from the HR Tech Conference in Las Vegas. Last year was all about how AI is replacing everything, was the assumption. This year, people are a bit more chill, and the focus is more around how AI is going to be augmenting certain responsibilities and helping people. And we're kind of at that place now, perhaps. In the L&D context, how should L&D professionals approach AI, not just as a tool, but as a shift in philosophy and power dynamics?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll just sort of address your first point, though. I think taking our foot off the pedal, becoming more relaxed about things is exactly the wrong thing to do. In the book on engines of engagement, we talked about two dimensions of change. So the first is change within the system. That's about efficiency and optimization. Some of that work is becoming well understood. That's a foundation of our comfort. We think we've got our hands around the edges of it. We think we know what's happening. But disruption of the system is a fundamental fracturing of the structures that we inhabit. And that's what we're facing into now. So I think we are nowhere near leaving the starting line of this disruption. And the ultimate position will be a breakdown of many of our industrial and post-industrial structures that still hold the value of work. So this is the wrong time to relax, but it's also the wrong time to be certain. When it comes to learning, we see a few key features. The first is that this is a dialogic technology. These are technologies which inhabit our natural landscape and vocabulary of learning. So that's a very positive thing. It means that we can learn with these technologies very easily without having to sort of learn how the technology works. But on the downside, and this is something I'm exploring in my next book, The Planetary Philosophy, which looks at how technology is overwhelming both our cognitive, our individual neurological foundations of sense-making, decision-making, and also our structures of culture are just being overwhelmed by the speed and synchronicity of that. So in the middle of all of that, we have organizations that are doing stuff with learning. And generative AI is clearly highly disruptive for this. It's kind of the poison chalice that we've wanted for a long time. We've spent decades talking about personalization and learning on demand, and suddenly we have it. And what we discover is that when we have it, it sweeps away much of the structure that we put in place around learning, which is often a structure of ownership and control. So I'm sort of describing a landscape rather than giving you a clear answer, I know, but I think we are kind of standing out on the ice and the temperature is warming and the ice is getting thinner. And if you look at the broad trends, we see that infrastructure is becoming an albatross. It's becoming more of a burden than a benefit. And people are seeking solutions outside of structure. And that is likely to continue. So I think more disruption is on the way, and probably a fundamental sort of fracturing and delamination of what we mean by learning within organizations.
Just a quick follow-up to that then. What are we looking at in terms of time frame until we're at a place where it's not about disruption, it's about that this is the norm? This is now how we work. We're being augmented by these technologies. So what are we looking at another 24 months, 36 months? Will we all be here by then? I mean, I don't know about you, but I recently read that AI 2027 report. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm aware I'm not giving you many clear answers to anything. That reflects the nature of my practice. It's exploring ideas. It doesn't carry great certainty, but what I would say is this. In my work on failure, complexity and control, which looks at how organizations fail, one of the things that comes out of that is that they often don't realize they failed until a couple of years after the actual point of failure. So in that language, I would say our organizations will persist in doing what they do over the next few years, but they may already have failed. So in my work on strategic AI, which is about developing social strategic foresight for more senior leaders, we look at the kind of 3 to 5 year window with a view that the next, from now over the next 18 months is where we need to be doing the high quality thinking. And I think in that 3 to 5 year view, we're going to be seeing a lot of the structural impacts really beginning to manifest. And, this is masked by two things. If you talk about epistemes, that are ways of knowing, they always persist beyond their useful sell-by date because they are embedded in the structures of society and they're embedded in our consciousness. We just think they're right, so they persist. Well, we're clearly seeing quite a lot of that. So organizations still talk about organizational learning as if organizational learning is still a relevant thing. But most likely, what we're seeing in parallel is quite significant investment and certainly quite significant job losses within all of this. So if I broke it down, I'd say the next 2 years, we might not see a lot of change, but I think we're seeing a lot of erosion. And then a point of collapse is kind of probably in that 3 to 5 year window.
You talk a lot about the narrative of change. We've just covered lots of changing things just a moment ago. What role do we play in writing that narrative?
Well, I'll turn that question around. What role do we play, or what role should we play? So in the strategic AI workshop, I talk about 3 sort of possible outcomes. So the first is a socio-cultural view of technology. This is about technology as tool and generative AI just being a better shovel. So that says we have our society very nicely set up how it is now. It has a few challenges around the edges, but essentially we carry on, we integrate this technology, and it just makes us better at doing what we're doing. That's one view. Another view is the robot overlords. It's technology as savior and God king, and it subserves us all underneath it, and that's probably problematic and leads to Skynet. The middle ground is the anthropotechnic. That's where people tend to settle. It says, technology is going to be more than just a new iPhone. It's going to really change something fundamental, but it's not going to be the evil robot overlord. So we end up in the anthropotechnic view. That seems very sensible. Within that, though, there's a lot of nuance. I've been writing at the moment about performance management. Organizations do performance management all the time. They do it terribly. It's used almost universally as a mechanism of control. It's very clumsy, and it's done once a year. Now, AI is going to give us much more synchronous and dynamics models of performance support, task definition, task allocation, role management. It's going to strip away lots of the higher order thinking and creation of sophisticated artifacts that humans, and especially human leaders, have previously done. So I think we're going to see that kind of change. We're going to operate in the world of the anthropotechnic, but the discomfort is going to come when we decide who's actually making decisions and who's recognizing and rewarding us. If you situate that in the broader context of the social age, I think we've seen organizations have exploited people for 40 years to wear down the social contract, to treat people as things. And now they will get what they deserve, because a lot of people are engaging their discretionary investment, their brilliance, their trust, their belief, their belonging in new and emergent structures. So the organization is not the only place where we can find value and belonging and belief. And so in that sense, organizations have engineered some of the structures of their own constraint. So I do see it as being a very significant disruption.
Julian, you're a strong advocate, of course, for curiosity as a core learning mindset. I think we've got a taste of that so far today. With such a big focus on data and reporting, how do we protect and promote curiosity?
Well, the good news is I don't think we have to protect and promote it, because curiosity is inbuilt. That's my 3-year-old daughter, poking stuff and prodding stuff and occasionally ingesting stuff just because she is curious. So we have that within us. We do tend to sometimes batter it down through organizational structures, but we certainly, if you looked at it from a leadership perspective, in my work on social leadership, I talk about how we no longer need so much of leaders doing stuff, leaders looking down at the chessboard and moving the pieces around. We need the leaders to be creating space and conditions in which people can be more curious. In the work on social learning, I talk about how social and collaborative models of learning give divergent outcomes, whilst formal learning tends to drive us towards the convergent. So we need to do more of that. We need to create more divergent outcomes, with the caveat that we then have to hold those outcomes within leadership structures and organizational structures that don't then persecute people for thinking differently. So part of it is the individual. Well, individuals are radically enabled by these disruptive technologies, and they have different places they can invest their engagement. We have to look at it at an organizational level. Do we believe capability is purely codified, or are we going to look at models of collective capability, social metacognition, how we think together, and emergence, how brilliance emerges from groups of people dynamically engaged in curious ways of problem solving. And then at the leadership level, how are people going to find power when they don't directly own and control you? So all of that comes together. But, back to your previous question, part of this is about where can we get to empowered by technology? And part of it ultimately will come down to where do we want to go to with technology? And that's a risk, because I think many good people and good organizations describe a future state which they think, broadly speaking, will hit their commercial imperative and their social obligation. But our space of disruption, both through hostile actors and asymmetric innovators, is often outside that sphere. And there's no prize for taking an ethical stance and a commercial perspective that means you're outcompeted and fail. So at some point, the question will become, what type of society do we wish to inhabit, rather than what type of society will technology give us if it remains unconstrained?
One of the big outcomes of the pandemic, of course, was that many teams, many organizations now are remote or hybrid, and with that brings certain opportunities but also challenges. With a more dispersed workforce, Julian, how do we ensure we remain culture shapers and culture storytellers when we're not necessarily physically there to pick up on certain cues, the ethos of an organization like we were pre-pandemic?
So I think actually the disruption of the pandemic is still very much ongoing. So it's not that we're now happily working remote. What many organizations are doing is gleefully trying to reimpose structures of power that are outdated and have failed. So the back to the office, future of work conversation is still very much in vogue within many of the organizations that I work with. And the social communities are very busy trying to subvert that. People trying to find and hold on to their own agency and freedom within it. So to me, it is an unsettled question of how we are remote, and a significant source of tension in many organizations. Within all of that, though, there is then a notion of how we differentiate between what's truly better or worse and what's simply familiar or unfamiliar. And those two are often conflated in conversations about culture and innovation and our familiar ways of working. So there is no doubt that fully remote organizations can be just as successful or more successful than fully grounded, physically co-located organizations. The nuance for me is informed by the research. So the research we've done in the landscape of trust work, on the landscape of communities research, in work on belief, how people believe in organizations and believe in their leaders, it's all very clear. It shows clearly that there is a relationship between structure and creativity, and there is a relationship between freedom, opportunity, and trust and belonging. So put simply, the most successful organizations are likely to foster individual agency at scale. So they will be highly effective and innovative. They will learn and change by doing less direct control and manipulation of people and creating a bit more space. People want agency and opportunity. That's very clear. Not endless. They don't want anarchy and they don't want complete freedom. They want some space to invest themselves within the system. And good leaders recognize that and create it, and good organizations will recognize that and create it. So for me, it's less about where you are working, and it's less about an abstract notion of culture, It's very much about individual leadership behaviors, organizational stance towards divergence and creativity, and how we hold that in quite dynamic, fluid systems.
Okay, so the where. What about the when, though? Just as a quick follow-up to that, in terms of giving people agency, sure, if they're an established professional, they've got lots of experience, they've got lots of proven skills, on-the-job skills, I get it. But just as a quick follow-up, on another podcast that I'm involved with, I often worry about more junior folks coming into their professional career. Do they need more guidance? Do they need more hand-holding? Should there be more structure around them? And if so, how do you do that if they're working remotely?
Well, it depends what you're looking for. If you want more of the same, absolutely. If you're looking to evolve, probably not. So some things we know are true. So groups that form online and then work face-to-face have different models of individual and collective identity, have different behaviours than those that form face-to-face, then move online. But it doesn't mean that one is necessarily better or worse than the other. One thing I've seen, I'm working with an organisation at the moment, a global law firm, that's seeing their graduate scheme, very prestigious graduate scheme, has suddenly come crashing to the ground. It's always generated very high engagement scores and satisfaction, and suddenly it's generating very low engagement scores and satisfaction because the graduates are using a lot of new technologies to synthesize knowledge and use it to take action, and are being told, well, that's no good. You can't have that knowledge. You can't be this wise till you've been here and served your 20 years. It's highlighting the tension and friction between structures of power based in seniority and structures of power based on actual ability. So I think it's a muddy answer to your question. I think I would reframe it. How do we build the capability that we need? Well, there will be some times when we want to get people together, and there will be some times when we want to foster fantastic collaborative remote work. But I don't think it will be as simple as saying new starters should be in the office and more established teams can be remote. What I would personally look at and what I advocate is diagonal cross-connection. So set up reverse mentoring, set up diagonal dialogic structures from the most junior to the most senior people that cut across the vertical functions, and use those to establish that connection. So when people come into the office, it's to spend time with essentially more senior and inaccessible people, and to forge these diagonal teams that can encourage all voices to be heard, can hold difference and dissent, and can use that as a real drivetrain for the organization. It's a real power to be able to unlock that.
Okay, very good. And just finally for today, Julian, looking ahead to the Connect conference in November, what themes or questions are you most excited to explore with the L&D community?
The main thing which I'm interested in at the moment is how we work together, how we convene spaces where we can get to a secondary level of analysis. So when I run the AI workshops, what I generally hear is primary description and primary analysis. So we saw a thing, we did a thing, we think a thing, and that's fine. You know, that's us all being busy, charging along in the busyness of work. I think these type of events allow us legitimately to escape from the everyday. So we do ourselves a disservice if we don't find opportunity to really carry ourselves into that curiosity. So what I want to hear and take part in and learn from is a more sort of systems thinking or metacognitive approach, which is what we would want our learners to have. So we say, what have we seen? What could that mean? What are the different interpretations of that? And feel absolutely no pressure to land anywhere with certainty or confidence, to kind of trust each other enough to get gloriously lost in it and forge the connections that we can carry forward for this continuous ongoing dialogue. If we go into it with certainty, come out of it with certainty, we're probably losing.
Okay. I am certain that you are correct about that. Julian, that just leaves me to say for today, thank you very much for joining me on the pod.
Thanks for having me along. It's been great.